excited. Listen, I mean, this is such a special event for us every year because we hear about what God's doing in our churches, but we never get to kind of see it all at once. You know, you're like, okay, I wonder how that West Market thing worked out. I mean, is that still happening? I mean, we still doing it? Market, you're like, well, I guess we left them high and dry. I guess that they probably are still empty over there from when we evacuated the place. You know, but so you don't get to see what God's doing in our church. And so once a year we get together, and it's just such an exciting time to be able to be here. But here's one of the really cool things that I think that you don't get to see week to week. That those of us that lead worship at the various campuses, or those of us that speak and rotate through West Market and Springbrook, and even the visits that we make out to the small group that's growing out there in Irwin, is what you don't get to see is that Northridge is Northridge wherever there's a Northridge. Like, we are one church, we have one focus, and you can walk into any of them and you can plug in and you can feel like, oh yeah, this is home. That we have the same focus, we have the same vision, we have that laser focus on who we are as a church. And so that's one of the things that you don't always get to see. And I don't know if you know this, but that's a miracle. That's a miracle, because let me tell you, there are plenty of churches that can't agree among themselves inside the church of what the direction of that church should be. And we have 2.5 churches that are spot on, working in lockstep together. And that's a miracle that happens. It's really a gift from God. In fact, I will tell you that there is so much about Northridge that is a gift from God. For one thing, the fact that we connect with people who previously hated church, that is a gift from God. You don't understand. There are churches all over this country that are saying, how do we connect with people who don't go to church? How do we reach people? And that hasn't been an issue yet for us as a church. We have been able to reach people who were previously unchurched. Another thing is that we're raising up strong students. We have 2 really thriving youth groups at the 2 different campuses right now. That those students are not just being entertained. They're just not coming and saying, well, I hope you can entertain me better than you did last year. That those students are being raised up to be influencers for Christ, and they're passionate about it. And it's exciting to see that. It's also exciting to see our college group. Good night, the first night of college group this semester, 45 people. Absolutely amazing. Tell you what else is amazing that is a gift from God to our church is our leadership team. Do you know that no matter how stressful, I mean, we bought buildings when we didn't know if we could afford it. I mean, you know, that it's just like, and I always said that when it comes time to start the second church, the first thing we're going to say is we don't have a budget for that. And my answer is always going to be, we didn't have any kind of budget for the first church, right? I mean, we came in and we had no budget whatsoever. And so even in tough decisions like that, like, hey, let's go hire a 4th staff member we don't need in 2012 so he can get busy working on a new church. Hey, let's go buy a building that as of right now we don't need so we can renovate it. Those are tough steps. And I don't care how stressful those meetings have been and how hard those decisions are, our leadership team is always together. And that's a huge thing. That's a gift from God to our church. Our group leaders are an amazing bunch of people who love shepherding people, who love helping them move to the next step in their relationship with Christ. I tell you something else that has been a gift from God is our staff. Our staff, every single one of them has worked their way onto staff, and every single one of them could have put their resume somewhere and could have made far more money right up front. But because of the vision and the mission of Northridge that they believed in, that they bought into, they said, you know what? We would rather be here than anywhere. And they slowly made part-time pay and part-time pay and part-time, more part-time pay, and then finally full-time pay. Sometimes full-time pay, but not really what we wanted them to have fully, and then the next year finally fully. And so it's just been incremental what we've been able to do to finally bring these staff members on to staff full-time. And we even have one right now, Johnny Bird, who's still working through that process. And I'm telling you that your staff is a gift from God. I could not go out and take resumes and find people that will storm hell with a water pistol like your staff will. sharp children's leaders that work every single week to create the best possible learning environment for our children. And that carries over in all of our volunteers. It carries over in our student volunteers, in the people that are on the host team, in the cafe, in the parking lot, at the information center. It carries over to our musicians and our tech people. Tonight you've already seen a little bit of their art, but there's way, way more to come. Northridge is not perfect. We're not perfect. But God has blessed us in so many amazing ways. And what God has given us, we cannot take for granted. I'm not going to talk that long tonight, but here's what I want you to understand. This is what I want you to catch. I want you to take this with you. Being a part of something that God is blessing is a huge responsibility for all of us. It's a huge responsibility for me. It's a huge responsibility for the lay leaders and the leadership team. It's a huge responsibility for you in whatever capacity you serve. It's a huge responsibility if you just show up and sit in a chair. Being a part of something that God is blessing is a massive responsibility. And it's important, I really think, that we understand why that's happening. I think a lot of times we don't really realize that there are reasons why God blesses things. We have this mindset, I think it's pretty prevalent here in the South, that we kind of think to ourselves, you know, God's just got his hand on this church. And that just happened. It's just the Russian roulette of God, right? Then it just went tick, 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 tick. Blessing. Woo! Good for that church. Right? And we don't have a term for what happens to the churches that God doesn't blessing. We don't talk about that. We're like, blessing, the hand of God. And we're like, I don't know, but the hand of God is on this church. And that, you know, we're not, the heel of God, I don't know. We're not sure what's going on. But there are reasons why God blesses certain churches and why God doesn't bless certain churches. And when you have that blessing, it is a massive responsibility. So it's really important to understand why and to continue to do the things that you've been doing. So there's a story in 1 Kings 17 that I think is going to show us why that's true. It's going to show us that factor, that X factor that changes everything. As we look at the life of Elijah. Elijah, of course, was a prophet of God, and that was a tough job, a very thankless job. Typically what you did is you went in and told the king when he was wrong. So, you know, if you had a good career, you might have made just a couple visits to the king. If you had a bad career, you were in there like every other day saying, well, you know, God said this and you did that. Come on, man. You know, and so that was your job, was to go in and tell the king, man, God says you stink. So, and so he goes in and he talks to Ahab, whose wife is Jezebel. Okay, so, you know, you've heard that term before. It's not usually used well. And so he's married to Jezebel, and they're leading the whole nation astray. They're leading them into idolatry and away from God. And so Ahab goes in and he says, here's what God says. If you're going to lead the nation away from God, then God is actually going to withhold rain from your land, not for a few months, for possibly years. Well, you know, Ahab thought this guy was crazy. This guy's just nuts, right? Yeah, good luck with that, whatever, thanks for stopping by. And so Elijah has to go find a place to hang out where God can take care of him so he won't starve to death and he won't thirst to death. And so God puts him at this brook and feeds him every day, and eventually that dries up. And here's what God does. God says, I want you to actually go somewhere else now. I'm going to lead you to Zarephath. And I want you to listen to the account of what happens to him when he gets to Zarephath. It says, so he went to Zarephath, verse 10, 1 Kings 17. It says, when he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. So Elijah's been led there. Somebody's supposed to take care of him. God actually tells him, I've already arranged. Okay? So he's looking for somebody that kind of very hospitable, ready to do this thing. Hey, I'm ready to take care of a prophet. And so he calls out to her and he says, would you bring me a little water in a jar so that I may have a drink? No problem. It says that as she was going to get it, so right away, boom, yeah, sure. They must have been low enough on water that they weren't watering fields. It hadn't rained, so the fields were drying up. They didn't have a lot of food, but they had water still. They did have some water. So she's anxious to go get the water for him, happy to help. And then he calls out and he says, and bring me, please, a piece of bread. Do you know there are certain times that you can tell the tone that something was said, even in writing? See if you can discern that here. As surely as the Lord your God lives, she replies, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son that we may eat it and die. I think she seems testy. Do you? I don't think she seems eager to help. I think everything turned at that point. And again, they must have had some water still, but they really didn't have a lot of food in that village. And so she says, you know what, you can forget it, man. I got one meal left, and I'm going to feed me, and I'm going to feed my son, and that's it with this last one meal. And Elijah must have been thinking, okay, clearly got the wrong person. We're going to move on. God said he's prepared somebody. This chick ain't it. But actually, God's beginning to lead him and draw him to this situation. And here's what Elijah says to her. Don't be afraid. Go home and do just as you said. But first, make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son. Elijah's not a math teacher. Right? 1 meal minus 1 meal equals no meals. Right? Am I right about that? Am I missing something? That's what she's got to be thinking. You know, look, you preachers aren't good with math. Like, 1 minus 1 is 0. And he says, no, don't worry about it. You know, just make it for me first, and then you'll have food. Trust me. That's what God says. God said it. So it'll work out for you. It's a really hard thing for her to kind of submit to that. And in verse 14 it says, he goes on and he explains, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says. So he's telling you, that God's promising you it's going to be okay. Just make it for me first. It says, the jar of flour will not be used up and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day that the Lord sends rain on the land. And then so she went away and she did as Elijah told her. And so there was food every day for Elijah, for the woman, and for her family. For the jar of flour was not used and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. Man, this is a huge stretch for her. Are you kidding me? I mean, even though he says, hey, this is the word of the Lord. God is going to take care of this. Trust me. If you will just do as I've said. How hard is that, though, with your last meal? To say, I'm going to give it to you, and if nothing happens, I won't even have had that last meal. And I'm already hungry. And I got to watch my son starve to death, knowing that I could have fed him one more time. Man, that's tough. It takes a lot of faith. But because she went and she did what she was told to do, what God had instructed her to do, guess what? She got to see God do something amazing. She got to see God do something that nobody else gets to see. See, we all want that, don't we? We all say, man, I want to see God work in ways that nobody else has gotten to see. But we just aren't so crazy about the path to get there. I want to point out a couple of things from this passage that I think really pertain to us as a church and where we are right now as a church. The first thing is that she was willing to follow God even though it cost her dearly. This wasn't easy, right? This was a huge struggle for her. But she chose to follow God anyhow, even though this was the hardest decision probably of her life, that she's going to say, son, I was going to go make some food for us. You know I don't have any more, but I'm going to feed this man first. Man, how hard is that? How hard is that? She's going to do the hard thing first. It's tough. I'm convinced that the churches that God is blessing are the churches that are willing to do the hard things that God asks them to do. You know what's not hard? The easy thing is to make church all about ourselves, isn't it? That, hey, just those of us that are inside these four walls, we're going to make church all about us, and that's all that's going to matter, and we're not going to worry about being out in the community and making connections and walking across the room and talking to people that we don't know and seeing if the Holy Spirit will open up opportunities for us to jump into their lives, because that could get messy, and that could get complicated, and that could get hard, and so, I'm not feeling it. Let's just make church about ourselves. That's the easy thing. The hard thing is to reach out. The easy thing on a Sunday is to come and enjoy and look at your friends and say, let's go to lunch and go hang out. The hard thing is to go meet somebody. Again, to walk across the room and say, I don't think I know you. How long have you been coming? Remember, that's the question. Not are you new here, because you make a fool out of yourself. How long have you been coming? Let's go to lunch. Say, Jim, I tried that. They already had lunch plans. Of course they did. They came to church, and they had already made up their minds before they came to church what's going to happen afterwards. But you still invited, and then you look at them and say, hey, next Sunday, come planning to go with us. Come planning to hang out with us. Hey, that's more complicated. That's harder. I might miss out on something with my friends. It's not the easy thing. The easy thing is to come to church and enjoy what's offered. That's what we do in the South. We shop churches. We show up and we say, well, what do you got to offer? What do you got for me? The hard thing is to be a person that makes what happens in the church happen because you sacrifice of your time and your money to make that church what it should be. That's the hard thing to do. She was willing to do the hard things. And secondly, because of that, because she was willing to do the hard things, God used her to do something significant. God used her to do something huge. God used her to keep this prophet alive during this time of drought. She had a massive assignment, an amazing opportunity. She got to see God work in ways that other people don't get to see. When just a few minutes earlier she was a woman starving to death, and now she's a person that thousands of years later we're still talking about. She got to be involved in something significant. She got to see God do something big. And the third thing is she was blessed in the process. See, we have it backwards. We're always saying, God bless me, God bless me, God bless me. And if you bless me, I'll pour myself out to other people. God bless me, and if you bless me, I'll make a difference around me. But this lady took the opposite approach. She said, I will sacrifice, I will give what I barely even have, really what I don't have I'm even going to give. And in the process, her family was blessed, she was blessed, she became a channel of blessing that God was using, and in the process, she was blessed more immensely than she ever could have been blessed. See, all of us want that kind of thing, but we don't want to make that sacrifice up front. But all of that happened because she was willing to stretch herself. Here's the bottom line. This is what I want you to get. This is what I want you to take with you, because this is so important to our churches right now. This is massive to our churches right now. Movements of God become monuments of man when sacrifice stops. Movements of God, that's what we've seen, become monuments of man when sacrifice stops. Let me give you just a little picture of this. In 2008, there were 48 people that met. 48 people that met to start a church. That church offered them nothing except pipe dreams. Some of you are here tonight. You were there for the pipe dream message. Nothing. We didn't even have children's classrooms. The kids just sat at a table in a hallway, really in a foyer. We met in a karate studio. We had no youth group. A lot of us had kids that were just going into a youth group. We didn't have a youth group. We didn't have a youth pastor. We didn't have anything. Musically, we had John with his acoustic guitar that in that little room was honestly too loud for his voice, and he was using a Radio Shack mic to try to overcome, you know. That's what we had. We started out with one $12 Radio Shack mic. You don't think you could have found a better music show somewhere else? Not a better music leader, better music show. See, the 48 people that the church offers nothing to, and the only thing they've got in common is they want to see something happen in Johnson City, and they're willing to be the people to make it happen. They're willing to sacrifice themselves. They're willing to give financially. And boom! Easter this year, 700 people. 700 people. 6 years later, 700 people, because 48 people said, I will sacrifice. I will push myself. I will stretch myself. There isn't, I can't look around and say, well, they're asking for some help. I guess somebody else will do it. There's nobody else. We're all, you know, we worried that we will all be working on Sunday morning. There will be nobody to actually sit and listen. 48 people. Now let me ask you a question. 700 people last Easter. That's 14 sets of 50. I'm spotting you too in every group. 14 sets of 50. Some preachers are good at that. So, 14 sets of 50. Let's think about that for a second. 14 sets of 50 people, and if every one of those sets of 50 people said, I will do whatever it takes to reach Johnson City for Christ, like the first 48 did. 6 years from now, at Easter, we should be looking at a modest 9,800 people. And if it doesn't happen, it will be because sacrifice stopped. And we will be on our way to becoming a monument of man instead of a movement of God. I didn't start a church to have that happen. They say after 10 years, church plants lose their evangelistic emphasis. It's one of the reasons we keep starting churches. Because we feel like all the existing churches need a kick in the pants. And when we send people out, it all of a sudden makes us look around and go, well, we should probably reach some people again. Yeah, we probably should. Probably should have never slowed down, right? And those new churches obviously are very aggressive. That's a programmatic, it's a structural thing for us. But it's got to be in all of our hearts. That sacrifice doesn't stop. That we have to keep reaching people. That we have to keep connecting with people. That we have to keep doing the hard things. Our response to what God has done in Northridge should be to once a year maybe come together and just lift His name up in music like we're doing tonight. It should be. But the real response should be that we should go out from here and that we should continue to do whatever it takes, that we should continue as an offering of praise back to Him for the fact that we've gotten a chance to be a part of something like this at all. Should be that we constantly are pouring our lives back into other people, investing in other people, reaching out, continuing to do the hard things, continuing to stretch ourselves further than we've ever stretched ourselves. Because we've already seen what one group of 48 people can do if they're totally sold out to sacrificing and being used by God to become that channel of blessing. And remember what I said about the widow? That through the process she was blessed? Let me tell you something. Those families that sat there that first day and thought, what in the world did we get ourselves into? Our kids don't even have a classroom. We don't even have curriculum. And what is that? Is that microphone from Radio Shack? Is that what I'm saying up there? Those people will tell you that they have been blessed immensely and their families have been blessed immensely because they got to be channels of blessing. Everyone wants to experience God in a massive way. But not everyone is willing to take the path that leads there. And I will promise you, as we continue to take the road less taken, we will continue to see things that nobody else has got to see.